Hello, fellow risk takers, and welcome to my worst investment ever. Stories of loss to keep you winning. In our community, we know that to win in investing, you must take risk, but to win big, you've got to reduce it. To join our community, go to myworstinvestmentever.com and receive these 5 free benefits. First, you get the risk reduction checklist I created from the lessons I've learned from all of my guests. Second, you get my weekly email to help you increase your investment return. Third, you get a 25% discount on all AE Stotts Academy courses. Fourth, you get access to our Facebook community to get to know guests and fellow listeners. And finally, you get my curated list of the top 10 podcast episodes. Fellow risk takers, this is your worst podcast host, Andrew Stotts from AE Stotts Academy, and I'm here with featured guest Marie Gervais. Marie, are you ready to rock?
Oh, yeah. Let's do this.
I want to introduce you to the audience. And, we just had like a really interesting conversation before we turned on the recorder, which I really appreciate. And I learned something also about long-term versus short-term gains from therapy and discussions. But I want to introduce you to the audience. Marie Gervais is CEO of Shift Management, and she offers targeted supervisory and middle management training, team coaching, and organizational capacity development to businesses and organizations. She has developed an award-winning program using online courses and live web coaching to help managers develop the confidence and skills they need to lead. For a competitive advantage, a clear focus on communication and conflict resolutions skills will get you there. You can build a healthy, inclusive, best-in-industry work culture. Dr. Gervais is your guide to success. Her upcoming book, The Spirit of Work, is scheduled for publication in November 2021. And ladies and gentlemen, if you don't get enough from this podcast, she is the host of the Culture and Leadership Connections podcast. Go check her out there. Marie, take a minute and fill in further tidbits about your life.
Thank you for the introduction and the dramatic way of doing it, which I really enjoyed.
You're the star of the show.
Well, why, thank you. The other tidbits would be that this is my 4th career being a business owner. It's my 14th year in my 4th career. So I get bored easily, but I haven't been bored as a business owner. So there's that. I'm also a visual artist, and I used to direct choirs and theater, which I don't have time to do anymore, but I still do visual arts.
And I see visualizations behind you, and you like some things up on your walls. I mean, leadership, learning, intercultural, shift, some of the words I see up there. Maybe you can just give us like a little tidbit about the value that you bring to your clients.
Yeah, so for my clients, I bring 2 things. I bring an intuitive spiritual approach that helps them to remove blocks that they have been sabotaging them for years, and very strong business strategy. I've coached hundreds of businesses through their difficult moments, and I can usually identify in minutes what the issues are and what they need to do next. But they won't do them until they remove the blocks. So it's that combination of the 2 that's pretty significant. And it really is a sort of a really valuing of the person or the people, so much so that they feel really cherished. And most of us don't feel appreciated, cherished, even acknowledged or seen most of the time. So that piece where I feel like I embrace the spirit of that other person really helps them to blossom and to move forward in a place of space and safety. And it's also very useful for companies who are so wounded. So many companies are so wounded, workplaces are very unhappy. So I've pretty much dedicated the business to increasing workplace happiness by increasing leadership skill. And that comes with the 2 sides, that intuitive side and that strategic side. And the skills get built in the middle.
Interesting. And, it is surprising how many people are unhappy with work. And people always ask me, why are you so happy with work? And I said, my advice, don't listen to me, but my advice is quit. And what I meant by that is that when I found environments that I just didn't enjoy, obviously, if it's a family or a relationship, I'm going to try to change that. But if I can't change it, I just left and said, well, I'm not up for that, so I look for something else. So that's kind of the way I dealt with it. And I built an environment around me of kind of happiness and all that. And that's my advice in that space. And I just wanted to also mention one thing. There's some listeners out there that are going, what do you mean block? I don't even understand what block means.
Well, people grow up with unconscious tracks playing in the back of their mind. The money blocks, for example, people have blocks to earning, they have blocks to saving, they have blocks to debt, they have blocks to um, money mistakes that they made that have caused money trauma. Those are some money blocks that they have. People have relationship blocks where they experienced, fight or flight as they were growing up, and that's all there was. And so they don't know how to have a loving, constructive relationship, or even a constructive workplace relationship, because at the first instance where something scares them, and they're not even aware they're being scared, they just quit. So
Mm,
they quit mentally, they leave the building mentally, and they're just not there, and they won't deal with anything, or they're just highly confrontational. So that's an example of relationship blocks. Or people keep attracting the wrong partner. They keep finding the wrong person over and over again, and they really similar characteristics each time. And they know it logically, but they don't know how to address it. So that would be an example of a relationship block. People have career blocks, they have relationship blocks, they have health blocks. Most things that are wrong with our health, with our bodies, have to do with an emotional issue that's manifesting physically in the body. So when
mm.
you address that, a lot of things just clear up. And so that's what I mean by blocks. So removing those pieces internally that you are not aware are there. Your life that you can see is the tip of the iceberg, and everything underneath is the result of your culture, your family, your environment, the experiences that you had, the opportunities you had, and the obstacles you had to overcome, and how you faced them. And so all of that then builds into who you are, but it's pretty unconscious. And so taking pieces of it and making it conscious can be helpful.
It's so for the listeners out there, think about the interesting thing about blocks is that you don't see them, that easily. What you see is the result of them, I guess. Like,
Yes,
you're afraid to get close to somebody, or, you're afraid of confrontation because you experienced a situation where confrontation really, really hurt you or something like that. And so what you see is that, you're not able to achieve the goals that you want or maybe the happiness that you want. And I think what I take away from what you're saying is that it's not just because you're weak or, you don't know how to handle the situation. It's just that there's probably something that happened in your past that set up the way you think about something and the way you feel about something, and it may have worked to protect you at that time, but now it may be working to hold you back. And so the
exactly. That's
the
it,
idea is
exactly.
try to
Yeah,
identify that, and I guess that's a great lesson. I'd love to hear that, and just for the listeners out there and for myself, I'm just thinking, okay, what are the things that I want to achieve, or what are the things that I want to experience that I'm not, and what potentially could there be that's blocking me from doing that? And just working harder
doesn't
doesn't
do it.
get, yeah. So
No,
great. Well,
no,
I think
no, it
that's
does. It doesn't. It doesn't do it. It's also not logical. You can't talk your way through it and create a strategy and follow it. In fact, if you create the strategy at a certain point, you'll always resist getting it done. So and that's because we have this false dichotomy where we think that we have a logical side, which we think is the really important side, but
mhm,
it's not even. It's like 10% of our thinking and our processing, that logical side.
mhm.
And then we have an emotional side that's related to our physiology. We have a spirit, we have a heart, we have a mind. All of those things are not the same thing as logic. And they all operate simultaneously at the same time. You can't just say, I'm not, people will say all the time, I'm not mad. And you can tell that they're really, everybody's going, yes, you are. Yeah. So the thing is that they operate simultaneously at the same time until you recognize what the triggers are and you can start to name them and release them. You're being ridden by your emotions instead of you riding the emotions. So
So I'm picturing our life is a 150-piece orchestra, and our logic is the flute player down there, that one little lone flute player that's playing out that logic. But there's a lot of other factors, in
the logic
play.
is probably the notes on the page. It's not
Yeah.
even the music. Yeah. So,
Mm.
and I'm a big believer in logic. I'm a very logical person in what
Yeah.
I do, but it is really only a fraction of what you need to make things work for you in your life.
Great. That's a great lesson for all of us. Well, now it's time to share your worst investment ever. And since no one ever goes into their worst investment thinking it will be, tell us a bit about the circumstance leading up to it, and then tell us
Okay.
your story.
Well, most of my industry clients in the manufacturing industry, and I belong to one of the manufacturing industry networks that was large for C-suite manufacturing decision makers. And I really learned a lot while I belonged to it. I belonged to it for 5 years, but it's very expensive. And it went from being $3,000 a year to $20,000 a year for an individual membership. And so that's why I don't belong to it today, because it wasn't worth that much to me.
Mhm.
But during that time, people kept saying how if they could just find a way to give their managers more practice in a way that didn't cost the company, because when managers make mistakes, it always affects the company in a huge way. And that was part of so many discussions that I attended, and lots of speakers addressed that. And so I thought, well, really, everything is going towards gamification. I do, I'm really interested in games for learning,
Mhm.
and really interested in sort of the whole process of how some people can experience, because my background is in drama. So having a world that you experience is really, I love that. I love that whole piece of being in the world. So I thought, well, what if we could create a world that managers could go into? This was before Google Glasses and immersive experiences had been invented. And so what if I could create something like that? I guess the only way to do it would be through a game. So I pitched the idea to some of the people that were there. Like there was the regional North American regional manager for Johnson and Johnson, and like they were really big companies that. And I said, what do you think about this? Is this something you think that's worthwhile pursuing? And they all said, yeah, that's a great idea. This is something we could really use. So that's the beginning of my mistake. So, so I thought that would be a great idea. And the thing is that I had been doing work online and courses online, but I had never created a game, and I hadn't worked through the process of creating a game before. And so I started to think about what I would do and how I would get practice doing that. And I thought, I know, I should create an app. I should create a management decision making app. So I'll start with that, and then I'll move into the game. And then the game I'm going to pitch to this whole audience of people that are decision makers that could send me to their training and development people, and we can start piloting it and see how that goes. So again, I pitched it to the group. I pitched it to about 20 people, and they said, oh yeah, that's a great idea. But just because people say it's a good idea, they haven't put any skin in the game, right? So yeah, good idea. You should do it. And then they gave me a few tips, which I thought was really useful. Come back to us when you finish the app. So I invested in the phone app, which was $20,000, and got me nowhere, because I went to a technology company that didn't know what they were doing with that particular type of game, because I didn't research it properly. So that the short version of this is, after that, I invested $120,000 in another technology company to create the game.
Mm.
And they didn't have the skills either. So I switched to a third one and lost more money. So the whole thing was a big money sucking hole. And I was using my business, which was doing very well, to subsidize it. Another money sucking hole. Bad idea. That's the context.
So, when I'm just curious because these ideas start off with so much excitement and opportunity. When was the moment when you realized all is lost?
Well, about halfway through, and before that, I started to realize that I didn't have the necessary experience to find the right people, but this did give me experience. I mean, I certainly learned a bunch of stuff, which I'll tell you later.
Mm.
So I didn't understand the tech process. I didn't know what a Scrum was. I didn't know what the phases of development were in a tech product, and I didn't understand how that there was always going to be a disconnect between people who speak code and people who speak ideas and people who are going to buy it. All they're like three planets in solar systems, in fact. And so like I didn't know that at the time. And because I always go with idea first rather than research, in the past I did. I don't do that anymore.
Mm.
Now I research really carefully. Yeah, I didn't research first. I went with idea, checked it out to see a segment of the market who might be interested, and then went from there. But I didn't have partners right from the beginning. So the partners were sort of flimsy, and they weren't really committed, and they had no investment in it. So they didn't really, it wasn't, they gave me some great ideas to get going with it, but it wasn't actually, I wasn't necessary for a commitment. Like I really needed a commitment and somebody who was going to will to work with me. And I was a really poor risk for them because
Mm.
I didn't have the experience. So why should they invest? I didn't have a track record in that area. I had track record in other areas. And several people kept telling me, huh, you do this really well. I'd be interested in talking to you about that. And I just ignored them and went on with the, yeah, but I want to do the game, right? So I lost business as a result of that single focus.
Hmm.
So yeah, and
Okay.
that's when I started. I realized my accountant said to me, "What are you doing? You've been subsidizing this thing for 2 years, and it's not going anywhere." And I went, "Yeah, right." That's when it hit
Those
me.
darn
I felt,
accountants.
oh, I felt so stupid and so ashamed,
Yeah.
and and then my husband said to me, "So, how are you going to start paying back this debt?" And then I lost it. I thought, I'm never going to pay back this debt. This was the stupidest mistake I ever made. And if I would have just continued to invest my business that was doing so well, I would have been light years ahead of where I am instead of sunk into this hole.
Mm.
Yeah,
So,
I felt terrible about it. The worst problem was the shame.
yep.
I just felt so ashamed. I felt like everybody on the street was looking at me and thinking, look, that woman does not know how to manage her money, right? Look how
Mm.
she totally messed that up. Of course, it's totally wrong, but
Mm.
that was it. So it was stopping me from doing other good things with my business. It took me a while to get through that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Part of the purpose of the podcast is to reach the listeners out there who are struggling in the middle of that right now, and they are feeling that shame. They are feeling depressed. And so I think, I really appreciate that you would share, how you were feeling through that process. So let me ask you, what lessons did you learn from the experience?
Well, it was really helpful for working with future clients in the tech industry and in the financial industry. And I was able, because I understood some of the processes from that. And then I took on another job shortly afterwards, which was a job that I thought, I'm never going to do this again because I don't like doing this kind of work and it's way out of my wheelhouse. And it was working really carefully with a tech company that wanted to roll out a version of their product. And I thought, this is not my wheelhouse. And I realized that, but I had so much data from all the interpersonal problems that I saw. I thought, oh, I can really work with my workplace communications and conflict resolution stuff. This is gold. This stuff is gold. So I started to think that way. I was able to move past the shame. I discovered something called the consciousness map. You might want to just look that up.
Mm.
The consciousness map. And what it is, it has emotions, their vibrational frequency, and what the mindset is, and how you see a divine being as influencing. So you might see, for example, if you see your divine being as being a mean, angry God, or if you see a benevolent being, or if you see a goddess that's part of the nature thing, you're going to see your failures and your successes differently. So it's really interesting, this consciousness map thing, and it can be used in multiple different ways. So the very bottom, underneath every single emotion, the one where you're just the lowest of the low, is shame.
Mm. I see
And
it. I'm looking at the mat right now. In fact,
yeah,
as you said that, and it's under God view, life view, and then level, and then at the bottom, shame. Yep.
yeah. And so in the middle is anger. People think anger is the worst, but it isn't. So it's really interesting that so I part of the way of getting out of that was personal development. I worked with a coach named Sharina Mayani that I interviewed on my podcast, and I worked with a couple of other coaches, and I discovered all the gifts that I'd learned from this mistake, and I started to dig my way out of the debt.
Mm.
And I also focused on what I was doing well in my business and started to be proud of that.
Yep.
And I started to see debt as good debt and bad debt. And I thought, you know what, this was actually not bad debt, because for one thing, it allowed me to write off all my taxes for a while. And the other thing was that it allowed me to learn a whole bunch of stuff that I would never have gotten before if I wouldn't have been through that experience.
Mm.
And I still have all of the stuff I created, like all the scenarios I created and all of those things, and that has come in handy in multiple other work.
Mm.
So
Yep.
yeah, so that was good, but I did have to go through I had to go through my own personal reflection process and do that assisted with somebody else, like not only on my own,
Right.
in order to get past it.
Mm.
And so that was what I did. And the
And just
lessons I would say was, first off, that take risks but be calculated. I'm not like most women who have a really risk averse. Like I was like, yes, I'm going to do this. It's a good idea, and let's just dive in, and I'll find the money, and I'll make it work, right? But now I've kind of learned my lesson. I've gone backwards, and I take calculated lists. I do really proper market research, and I'm very careful about each step of the way, testing every point with potential clients, and those clients have to have a skin in the game if I'm trying a new idea.
Yeah.
So that's what I learned from it.
Got it. And just to be clear, the book that I'm looking at is called The Map of Consciousness Explained, a proven energy
Yeah.
scale to actualize your ultimate performance by David R. Hawkins.
Yes, that's it. It's been around for a while,
Hmm.
but it's a very useful tool. It doesn't become dated. Kind of like, Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich.
Yep.
There's some things in there where I'm going, you can tell that was a later, but most of the stuff that he has to say is really interesting. And one interesting that comes out of that Napoleon Hill book, which I think is my also my learning from this worst investment, is he created in his mind a series of people he admired and that were successful in different ways that were either past or present in his life. And every night before he went to bed, he would consult with them on a business problem for a period of time, and they became real personages. And it was kind of weird. He kept thinking, "Am I going crazy with this idea?" And then he met one of the people who was alive and mentioned something about it. And the guy turned around and said exactly to him what he had imagined in his imaginary conversation with the guy. And they had never discussed anything like this before. He just
Mm.
met him for the first time, kind
Yep.
of thing. And so it was really interesting. So he must have been tapping into some collective wisdom. And I think that I started to realize that I can't do everything alone. I have to tap into the collective wisdom, the
Yep.
actual wisdom, and I have to start using the people around me and the research that's available to me more effectively and not try to do it alone.
Mm. So let me summarize some of the things I took away. I mean, one of the things I just wrote down as you wrote that you told about that is that many years ago I gave a presentation about one of the businesses that I have with my best friend here in Thailand, a coffee business, and we gave a presentation to a group of people, and I said, maybe in the middle, I said, I'd like to introduce you to our advisory board. It's very distinguished, and then I showed a book of Napoleon Hill, and I showed the book of Dr. Deming, and I showed the book of all the key people who have influenced our lives. And I said, we base a lot of what we do based upon our very distinguished advisory board, which I just showed a lot of books. But the truth is if you read the books of what people, you're getting, a honed down message of what they say. So that's the first thing you reminded me of. The second thing is when you validate an idea, the best way to validate is to get people to pay you cash.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that's where you alluded to the fact that people are like, yeah, yeah, that sounds good, that's all right. But, in the end, that's not that's not
Well, and
really
I
proof.
wasn't actually confident to ask for it, but I am now.
Yep,
Like,
yep,
so now I'm going to say, yeah, for this is what it's going to be. Are you interested in it? All right, it's going to cost this much. You want to commit?
yep,
Right. And I'm like fully expecting them to say yes. And if
yep.
they aren't, I don't take it personally. But before I was not expecting them to say yes.
Mm.
And so that should have been a red flag for me. But
Yeah.
you live and learn.
The other one is, there's this, tech is everywhere and, tech's supposed to be getting easier and all that. But the truth is that we oftentimes face a pretty significant tech hurdle.
Yes.
And when we get an idea, it could be a good idea, but the actual challenge of implementing it in the tech space is much harder than it appears. And I did have another guest that developed a game. It was called Pictionary, and it was a guy named Rob Angel. He was episode 243.
Mm.
And basically, but the thing about his development was he was just writing things down on pieces of paper, and it's like there was no tech hurdle. And so, one of the questions I want to raise for the listeners out there is to think, how could you remove the tech hurdle to test your idea? And I think that that's a real challenge. And if you could do that, then you could potentially validate that, okay, now it's worth going in and trying to develop some of this tech.
I'm really glad you said that because that's actually one of the most important things that I learned. And that's been the basis for all my business decision making about things. I use a lot of tech tools, but I'm looking first for, can it be written down? Can it be done with soft technology? Is this something that can be reused with something that is already existing or not? And, like how can we use what we've already got to get the same results? And it really transformed the way I was working with people online.
Mm.
So people have to have a real connection to a human being,
Yeah.
or they just don't learn. They have to have a collegial context in which they discuss things. And then the online content and the way that it works reinforces the content learning, but it actually doesn't make a difference how many bells and whistles you have and how many fancy stuff is in there. What matters is how much they relate to the content,
Mm.
right?
Yep.
So if you're looking at that first, then anything you add on is going to be value added to the experience, the optimal experience for the customer. But I have people from tech companies approaching me all the time and going, "Oh, we want to build this, and what do you think owners are going to want?" And I went, "Well, have you talked to anybody? Because I'm an owner and I wouldn't want any of that stuff." So
Mm.
like, so I think you have to. It's got to meet a real need and work with real human beings, and the technology is the vehicle. If the
Yep.
technology is the vehicle, then you're much more likely to be successful.
And the final thing is one of my recent episodes, which I'm going to release pretty soon. My guest said something that was pretty profound to me, and I hadn't thought about it. But we always talk about the sunk cost fallacy. You've invested so much money, time, energy into it, and so it's hard to let go of something. But you need to let go of something. But what he said was that the money, the sunk cost fallacy uh, avoids should include the learning. And a lot of times we forget that, there was a huge amount of learning. Yeah, they cost us, but the learning that came out of it, you know, is so valuable. So it just reminded me that if a listener out there, if you're stuck in a situation where you have sunk in a lot of cost, you've sunk in a lot of money, you've sucked in a lot of energy, but you realize it just may not work. If you walk away from it, it's so painful to walk away. But the truth is, you're going to leave with a huge amount of learning. And I think that's one of the things that you remind me of through your story.
Yeah, what I call that is that I had to pay my tuition,
Yep.
right? So the sunk cost is my tuition fee. And when
Mm.
I started seeing that whole experience as being a tuition for the next step in my business to be able to scale, I went, oh, that's not so bad.
There we go. We feel better right there.
Yeah,
I
I
look at
can
all the
recoup. I
things I
can
wasted
recoup
my
that.
money on and my time, and I can feel a little bit better that I learned from each and every one of them.
Well, it's their tuition. Maybe it's their tuition in that for learning how to spend appropriately or learning how, I mean, so
Yeah,
it can also be that you had to learn something the hard way.
yep,
Maybe your tuition fee was higher because you wouldn't
exactly.
listen to the stuff that was around you that was trying to speak with you.
So now I would like you to put yourself, into the shoes of a young person or any person listening right now who is trying to push an idea in a similar way maybe that you were doing. And based upon what you learned from this story and what you continue to learn, what one action would you recommend our listeners take to avoid suffering the same fate?
Develop a relationship with somebody who has has the knowledge you need over a period of time. Allow yourself to develop that relationship and learn from that person
Mm.
and allow the time that's required for the process. It's like a plant growing. You can't just yank on it and say, grow. You have to create the environment. And to work with someone, if I had found someone who had the tech knowledge that I needed and who I could just become a friend, and I actually did
Mm.
find that person through the process kind of vicariously and has remained a friend and a confidant for all sorts of things. If I wanted to launch anything, I'm going to talk to her first because she's one of the top people in the world. I would never have found her if I wouldn't have been through that issue. So it was, yeah, find one person who can be your mentor, and eventually it becomes reverse mentorship too because you teach the other person.
Yep.
But yeah, I would say that's the one action item.
Great advice. So, ladies and gentlemen, you've got the advice. Now go out and do it. Find that person and start that conversation because what you've just heard is it takes time. So, last question. What's your number one goal for the next 12 months?
Well, I'll get my book published. I'm just about finished. I'm on the last chapter, so get it published and out in the world and have some speaking engagements around it so that people can learn from it.
Fantastic. Well, we're going to be all cheering you on with that. So, listeners, there you have it, another story of loss to keep you winning. My number one goal for the next 12 months is to help you, my listener, reduce risk and increase return in your life. To achieve this, I've created our community at my worst investment ever supervisory.com. I look forward to seeing you there. As we conclude, Marie, I want to thank you again for coming on the show. And on behalf of A Stotts Academy, I hereby award you alumni status for turning your worst investment ever into your best teaching moment. Do you have any parting words for the audience?
I'm sure I had lots of things
Well,
inspirational to
that was
say,
a
but
laugh. I love that parting word.
I think I'm just going to say have a little fun with what you're doing.
Amen. And I just
Yeah.
see you laughing and smiling, and that makes my day better. So, ladies and gentlemen, take that advice. Have fun, enjoy, and laugh it up. And that's a wrap on another great story to help us create, grow, and protect our wealth, fellow risk takers. This is your worst podcast host, Andrew Stott, saying, I'll see you on the upside.